made me realize I was watching a piece on the PBS weekend news. They had those kind of two shows. These two guys that basically played cello duets with a lot of rock music.
Please let's all join in a few moments of centering silence. And now please remain seated as we sing our ingathering hymn, number 39, and the words are also written in your order of service. Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. This is a community where curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nurturing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual, as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Karen Rose Gredler, and on behalf of the congregation, I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors who are with us this morning. We are a welcoming congregation, so whomever you are and wherever you are on your life's journey, we celebrate your presence among us. Visitors are encouraged to stay for our fellowship hour after the service and to look for people carrying teal-colored stoneware coffee mugs. These are FUS members knowledgeable about our programs and community life who are looking forward to the chance to speak with you this morning. You can also stop by our information table outside of the library, across from the back doors of this auditorium. And you can find more information about upcoming events and programs at the information table. In this lively acoustical environment, it can be difficult for those in attendance to hear what is happening in our services. So we remind you that our child haven back in that corner, somebody's back there, and the commons area behind the auditorium are great places to go when perhaps a little person wants to hop around, sing, dance, be a normal little person, and you can hear and see everything well from there. We do have also hearing assistance devices available, so if you feel one of those would help you in the service, please see one of the ushers and they will help you with that device. This would also be an excellent time to turn off any electronic devices that might disrupt the service, particularly cell phone ringers. Experienced guides are generally available to give tours after each service. I'm not sure if there's one here today. I didn't see anybody signed up. Is there anyone who'd like to be a guide after service? Oh, look at all the hands. Oh, wait, there's one. Thanks, Marge. If you would like to have a guided tour of this sustainably designed edition and our National Landmark Meeting House across the parking lot, please meet March near the large windows at what is your left side of the auditorium right after the service. And she'll help you and show you around. I'd now like to acknowledge those individuals who helped to make our services run well. And for this service, Maureen Friend is in charge of the sound system, and Smiley is our lay minister. Our greeters were Paul and Kathleen Berge, and our ushers are Sam Bates, Patricia Becker, Ann Smiley, and Douglas Hill. Back in the kitchen making some coffee are Jeannie Hills and Bis Nitschke. So, please note the announcements in the red floors insert to your order of service. This red floors is chock full of information, so please take a look at it. I'm not going to read extra announcements, but look at all that information about what's going on. As you know, in December there are several special events. Again, welcome. We hope that today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit. Thank you.
Opening words are from Mohandas K. Gandhi. There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it, although I do not see it. It is this unseen power that makes itself felt and yet defies all proof, because it is so unlike all that I perceive through my senses. It transcends the senses. I do dimly perceive that while everything around me is ever changing and ever dying, there is, underlying all of this change, a living power that is changeless, that holds all things together, that creates and dissolves and recreates. And so I can see that in the midst of death, life persists, that in the midst of untruth, truth persists, in the midst of darkness, light persists. And hence I gather that God is life, truth, and light. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for the lighting of our chalice. Please join me in the words of affirmation printed in your program this morning. May God, the mind that sees our faults, the tears that sting our wounds, the laugh that soothes our aches, and the love that redeems us all, be illuminated by the light we kindle in this house of peace. And in the name of that redeeming love, please turn to your neighbor and exchange with him or her a warm greeting. Over and out. Okay. Take care, Kairos.
seated.
Come up for a story, that would be great. Come on up. Over a little bit. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Because someone at 9 o'clock said said they had a hard time seeing the pictures, so we'll move this back. You think you can see the pictures okay? Hard to tell without the pictures there, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad you're all here this morning. Our story this morning is going to be about a very big topic, and that topic is God. And throughout history, all over this globe, people have asked a lot of questions about God. They've wondered if God exists. If God exists, they wonder what God might look like. If God exists, they wonder what she or he might do in our lives. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of different answers to those questions. And this morning we're going to read the book, Because Nothing Looks Like God. And the authors, Lawrence and Karen Kushner, share some of the questions that they've had about God and some of the answers that they think are important and true. So, here we go. Hopefully now you can see. Where is God? God is in the beginning, in the first red ripening of a tomato, and in cookies fresh from the oven, in the first fun day of vacation, and in the tiny hands of babies. Where is God? God is in the end, in the last sweet bite of birthday cake, and in your worn, torn baby blanket, in the last wave goodbye at the end of a visit, and in the closing moments of someone's life. Where is God? God is in the way people come together, in the sharing of a cold and gloomy morning, and in the Band-Aid fix-up after a fall, in homemade gifts made of clay and paint, and in morning hugs and goodnight kisses. Where is God? God is in the world, in bird chirp, frog song, and chattering squirrels, and in the fly caught in the spider's web, in caterpillars chewing leaves from daisies, and in worms turning leaves into earth. Where is God? God is everywhere if we only look. God is wherever we let God in. What does God look like? God looks like nothing, and nothing looks like God. But there are many things that you cannot see, and still we are sure that they're there. Like cool breezes on a hot summer night, or the rays of the sun drying puddles in the rain. Like the long hours until supper time, or the short minutes of a day at the beach. You know they're there, but there's nothing to see. Like the kindness in someone's voice, or the happiness in a song. Like the pride when mom or dad helps in your class, or the jumpy excitement at the start of a holiday. You know it's there, but there's nothing to see. Like the love your mom adds to your goodnight story, or your dad's hooray when you first tie your shoes. Like your hope when it's your turn to bat, or your worry when your dog runs away. You know it's there, but there's nothing to see. God doesn't look like anything either, because there's nothing to see. But everyone and everything gives us clues that God is here. Clues that point to the one we cannot see. How does God make things happen? Look at your family. See sisters taking turns and brothers sharing a new game. Watch how everyone comes together to help with dinner. How does God make things happen? Look at your school. A boy helps when another can't reach. A girl shares her lunch. Watch how everyone shows the swings to a new friend. How does God make things happen? Look at your town. One family gives money for people who lost their family to a fire. A neighborhood, I just don't know what happens if it gets turned on. A neighborhood gathers books for children in the hospital. Watch how everyone helps a family with a new baby. How does God make things happen? Look in the mirror. Can you visit someone who feels lonely? or pick up trash in the playground? Can you and your friends collect toys for children who have none? How does God make things happen? With little hands and big hands, with young hands and old hands, with your hands and your hands and your hands and your hands, and all of your hands can help make things happen that God would want to have happen. I bet your hands do a lot of really good things. And I know that a lot of you have had faith in action in your classes, and you've done good things in those activities where you've prepared lunches with love for the Ronald McDonald House, or you've collected books for the kids staying at the Children's Hospital, or got food ready for people who need a meal. Your hands have done a lot of really good things. And now we're going to go off to your classes, where I hope you'll continue to do really good things and be kind to each other. Thank you for joining me.
I was at school named Edgewood.
The first reading is a selection, a passage from Alice Walker's celebrated novel, The Color Purple. Alice Walker, an African-American novelist of some repute. Her book was also made into a feature film that I'm sure many of you have seen if you have not read the book itself. Seeley, the protagonist in The Color Purple, says, "I don't write to God no more." "What happened to God?" Shug asked me. "What do you care?" I said. "Big a devil as you are. You not worried about no God, surely." "Wait a minute," she said. "Just hold on a minute there. Just because I don't harass it like some people I know, don't mean I don't have religion." "Well, what did God ever do for me?" I asked. She says, "Seeley," as if she's in shock, "He gave you life, good health, a good woman who loves you to death." "Yeah," I say, "and he gave me a lynched daddy, a crazy mama, a low-down dog of a step-pa, and a sister I probably will never see again. Anyhow," I say, "the God I've been praying and writing to, he's a man, and he acts just like every other man I know, trifling, forgetful, and low down." Shug say to me, "Miss Seeley, you better hush, God might hear you." "Let him hear me," I say. "If he ever listened to poor colored women, the world would be a different place, I can tell you that." Well, Shug, she talked, trying to budge me away from my blasphemy. She say, "Seeley, tell the truth. Have you ever found God in church?" I never did. I just found a bunch of folks hoping he would show. Any God I ever felt in church, I brought in with me, and I think all the other folks did too. They come to church to share God, not to find God. Here's the thing I believe, said Shug. God is inside you. God is inside everybody else. You come into the world with God. But only them that search for it inside find it. And sometimes it just manifests itself even if you're not looking for it. It? I asked. Yeah, it, Shug says. God ain't a he or a she, but a it. What does it look like? I asked. Don't look like nothing, she said. It ain't a picture show. It ain't something you can look for apart from everything else, including yourself. See, I believe God is everything. Everything that is and was, everything that ever will be. And when you can feel that, when you can be happy about that, you've found it. Well, Shug and me, we talk about God, but I'm still adrift. I've been thinking about God as that big, hairy old white man for so long, I just can't chase him out of my head. And I've been so busy thinking about him, I never truly noticed nothing that God made. Not a blade of corn? How would it do that? Not the color people, purple? Where'd that come from? Not the little wildflowers? Nothing. Well, whenever you're trying to pray, says Shug, and that man plop himself down at the other end of it, you just tell him to get lost. You conjure up flowers and wind and water and a big rock instead. This is hard work, I can tell you. That old man has been in my prayers for so long that he just don't want to budge. So us fight a lot. And I hardly pray at all. And every time I conjure up a big rock, I just throw it at that old man. The second reading is from A.C. Grayling, who is a professor of philosophy at New College in London. There is a near universal assumption that God is a word that refers to something other than an idea. That its referent is something that one can believe in and variously obey, fear, worship, praise, have a relationship with, and invoke to describe a wide variety of things, such as the origin of the universe, the intricacies of nature, the foundation of moral principles, the purpose of life, and more. For religious people, the word God is typically invoked to denote the all-encompassing, unanswerable source of authority governing what people can say and think and eat and wear. And the fact that different religions claim that their God or gods have different requirements in these respects, well, that should be evidence that religions are man-made and historically conditioned. But religious people think that this insight applies only to other people's religions and not to their own. It seems then that everybody is an atheist about almost all gods. The difference between true atheists and Christians or Muslims being that the latter still have one more God to go, one more God to stop believing in. Thank you, Philip, so much, and thank you, Dan. On the day after Thanksgiving, one of the deadliest terrorist attacks of modern times was unleashed on Muslims gathered for worship at a mosque in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. 305 were killed, including a substantial number of women and children. 128 others were wounded. And the victims of this attack were all Sufis. The perpetrators belonged to the fanatical fringe movement ISIS, which, like Al-Qaeda, is rooted in the Islamic Sunni tradition. Despite all the attention paid in the Western press to assaults by radicalized Muslims on Europeans and on Americans, others of that faith, the Muslim faith, have borne the brunt of this religiously motivated violence. Islam, it appears, is at war with itself. And although the casualties suffered by the Sinai Sufis were especially severe, this was not the first time that they were targeted. There were others attacks earlier. And large numbers of Shiite Muslims gathered at their shrines and at local markets have also been killed by car bombings. And again, those responsible are typically Sunnites who claim to be on a mission of purification, cleansing Islam of heretics. Now, while competition for control of political and economic resources is sometimes a factor in these attacks, religious differences, and in particular the ways in which these various Islamic sects view God, that is a particularly strong motivation. Now, all Muslims subscribe to monotheism. The Shahada, the profession of faith, simply states that there is no God but Allah. But there are some who will not tolerate even the slightest deviation from that confession. So although the peaceful Sufis have been around for 1,000 years, Muslims, like those aligned with ISIS, have declared that movement to be completely illegitimate. Why is that? What have the Sufis done? Well, like our own Roman Catholics in Christianity, they preserve the memory of their most venerable and divinely inspired ancestors, and they elevate those ancestors to sainthood. And so the Sufis visit their tombs, they leave offerings there, and they invoke the names of these saints in their prayers. And Islamic fundamentalists say that this smacks of polytheism, a denial of God's oneness. And so Sufis are guilty of the sin of shirk, the illicit claim that God has partners, which is a charge that the Sufis themselves strenuously deny. Now, this rift within the Muslim world serves to underscore the ambiguity that we face when we ask the question, well, what do those people who believe in the Quranic teachings, what do they believe about God? It's not an easy thing to answer. And were we to ask the same question of Jews or Christians, the answers would be equally uncertain. Within each of these traditions, we find conflicting notions of who and what God is. And yet all three of these traditions are putatively monotheistic, all trace their lineage back to the same patriarch, Abraham, all draw, albeit selectively, from the same body of revealed scripture. Now, one would then suppose that Jews and Muslims and Christians share a great deal in common. And in certain respects, they certainly do. As Muhammad himself once observed, Jews and Christians, like Muslims, reject polytheism. They all pledge fealty to the same single God. And for this reason, Muslims have, for most of their history, permitted their fellow monotheists to live unmolested in their midst and without being pressured to convert to Islam. But even as there are salient differences within each of these three religions, which has led to a great deal of tension and a great deal of conflict, there are also differences between those religions as well. The plain fact is, not all monotheisms are alike. And to begin with, Christians, for the most part, can be classified as soft monotheists, whereas Muslims and Jews generally can be thought of as hard monotheists. Now, what this implies is that Christianity, in adopting the doctrine of the Trinity in 325 AD, fudges on the question whether God is one. To hard monotheists, The Trinity seems to violate the core tenet of their faith. And our own Christian Unitarian forebears were also, like Muslims, like Jews, hard monotheists, because we accepted Jesus as a supremely enlightened prophet, a teacher bearing a saving message, but we denied that he enjoyed a metaphysical relationship with God the Father. And so, like the Jews and the Muslims, our Unitarian forebears rejected the idea that God has or that God needs any partners. Now, radicalized Muslims carry this position to extremes. They are what we would call ultra-hard, and they despise all, whether Christian or Muslim, all who are not sufficiently rigorous in their monotheism. And thus, even the veneration of saints has become, for these ultra-hard Muslims, a legitimate cause for preying on others of their faith. Christian monotheists are soft in other ways as well. For example, both Jews and Muslims are iconoclastic. In other words, they say that it is inappropriate to create artistic renderings of God, graven images, as they might put it. And for Jews, even to spell out God's full name is a violation of his majesty and his complete otherness. As Stephen Prothero notes, Jews leave out the vowels in writing God's name so as not to cause offense when the piece of paper on which that name is inscribed is thrown away. This is hardly seen as a problem in Christianity. Jesus, the Son of God, has long been a favored subject of religious artists. Icons figure prominently in Eastern Orthodox worship. In painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo placed this bearded God in the act of creating Adam at the very center of that ceiling, in the center panel. And for Muslims, such representations and even scholarly inquiries into the divine nature are frowned upon, because they believe that all such efforts only succeed in placing God on the human plane, and they're therefore idolatrous. Now, the qualities or the attributes that God manifests can, however, be spoken of, and they are enumerated. The Quran lists 99 attributes or qualities of God, the names of God, and repeating this is an important part of Islamic devotional life. Now, some of these 99 names are feminine, and others are masculine, which is meant to indicate that Allah cannot be classified by gender or otherwise anthropomorphized in any way. And there are also significant differences in these three religions in terms of the role that God is thought to play in human affairs. Islam's God does not assist human beings by performing supernatural miracles, as most Christians believe he does. Allah's cosmos operates according to natural laws, which, of course, Allah himself created. Natural law is God's law and is therefore inviolate. There's only one standing miracle in Islam, the Quran itself, which was delivered verbatim and in Arabic only to the Prophet Muhammad. And so human beings have the Quran to open their eyes, to guide them through life's pathways. But otherwise, we are free beings who are completely on our own. There's no counterpart in either Judaism or Islam to Christianity's Holy Spirit, that aspect of God that remains an active presence in our world. And so we do not find Muslim clerics, we do not find Jewish rabbis claiming that they are guided by the Spirit, as Christian clergy often do. Channeling the Holy Spirit, Christians claim to be able to cure diseases, to cast out demons, which, as we know, opens the door to all kinds of religious chicanery. Now, for their part, Karen Armstrong writes, Jews do not think of God as some kind of big brother watching their every move, intervening in human affairs. Rather, she says, we are to cultivate a sense of God within each human being so that our dealings with others become sacred encounters. By serving others, we reproduce God's benevolence and God's compassion. Another notable difference between these three faiths has to do with God's expectations of us as human beings. How are we to serve the Almighty? Well, in doctrinal Christianity, the emphasis, of course, is on belief. Wholehearted, unqualified assent to the tradition's core tenets, to its confessions of faith. The operative term here is orthodoxy, which literally means to hold the right opinion. This is mandatory. And over the centuries, those who could not make the required professions of faith, which included our own Unitarian Universalist forebears, were actively discriminated against, even if they led otherwise upright Christian lives. It's not that behavior didn't matter, only that the individual's salvation was thought to be contingent on his or her doctrinal fidelity rather than their ethical conduct. Historically, the key question to act was not, what would Jesus do, and then act accordingly. The most important question was an ontological one. Who is Jesus? And for that, there could only be one acceptable answer. Now, for Jews and Muslims, belief does matter, and confessions of faith are important, but deportment, what we do with our lives, that matters even more. God wants us to live in a certain way, and thus the Jewish mitzvot, the 613 behavioral rules that are listed in the Pentateuch, these represent a handbook for staying in right relationship with the Lord and with each other. Now, Orthodox Jews strive to fulfill the law in all or at least most of its particulars. Members of the Reform and Reconstructionist movements are less observant, and according to Jacob Neusner, they regard the Torah as a statement of eternal principles that can be changed to respond to new conditions. The concept of mitzvot is still important in all branches of Judaism, but many of those mitzvot listed in Torah are no longer considered relevant to at least some Jews. Behavior counts for a good deal in Islam as well, and Muslims are encouraged to submit themselves completely to God and to make the divine will their own will. In our UU hymnal, we have a song that begins with the words, "We are not our own." We are not our own. And that is an idea that Islam expands upon. Our bodies, our lives do not belong to us. They belong to God who gave them to us in the first place. And thus, we all owe a debt to God. The Arabic word is al-din. And we fulfill that debt by investing our whole lives in the religious practices ordained by God found in the Quran. According to the Muslim scholar Sayyid Hossein Nasr, religion, he says, provides concrete guidance so that men and women can live according to the will of God and thereby gain knowledge of his oneness and the manner in which all multiplicity is ultimately related to the one. Every act that a man or woman performs, every thought that he or she nurtures, every object that he or she makes must be related to God. And so in Islam, Nasser says, religion is that reality that makes this nexus between the world we know in all of its aspects and God, makes that nexus possible. Now, in considering God's expectations of human beings, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity part ways in another important sense, because historically Christianity has cast suffering in a positive light. Because Christ's suffering was ultimately redemptive, we can expect that, if dedicated to God, our own suffering will also be looked upon favorably. The early Christian martyrs were lifted up as models to be emulated, as were cloistered and celibate monks and nuns in later centuries. And some Christians even today take this to extremes and they engage in acts of self-mortification. Others of us seek meaning and comfort in our suffering if we think that it is God's will that we suffer. If I suffer, we say, then God must have a good reason for it. Or, as the sorely afflicted Job put it, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Now, one can always find exceptions on this point, but Judaism and Islam are of a different persuasion. The Jewish rabbis of old insisted that God did not want men and women to suffer, that Jews were, in fact, duty-bound to treat their bodies as gifts deserving of tenderness and pleasure. God is not to be found in suffering or asceticism, Karen Armstrong writes, and Jews are notable for their lack of sexual prudery and their wholehearted enjoyment of food and drink. And it may even be considered sinful and a sign of ingratitude toward God not to show appreciation for life's beneficent offerings. And Islam also teaches that God intends for human beings to be healthy and happy. The vast majority of Muslims roundly condemn the suicide bombers, the self-appointed martyrs who claim to be acting in Allah's name. Such actions are, in fact, expressly prohibited in Islam's sacred literature. Now, there are, as we know, those conventions in Islam of fasting and pilgrimage which would seem to entail hardship and discomfort, and these practices are incumbent on all good Muslims. But individuals are excused from those exercises if their health will not permit it. And as Faisal Abdul Rauf, an American imam, observes, the Ramadan fast is really intended to accelerate one's spiritual progress. And so by the end of the month of Ramadan, you will feel strengthened. You will feel you are capable of more than you thought you were capable of doing. You are less susceptible to that idea, hey, I just can't help myself. Ultimately, Islam does insist that existence ought to be pleasurable, but that we can derive the most benefit in becoming aware of the fact that life is a gift from Allah. Allah made us worshipful beings, Abdul Rauf writes, and our greatest pleasure actually is in contemplating the divine. So these then are a few of the more obvious ways in which our three monotheisms converge and diverge on this complicated question of God. But as I noted at the outset, within each of these traditions there are going to be differences of opinion, which makes blanket statements almost impossible. So in Judaism, as Stephen Prothero observes, there is this old adage that wherever you have two Jews, there will be three opinions about the religion. And the same, of course, could be said of Christianity. The difference being that Christians are not encouraged to ask those kind of probing questions. Prothero says that Jews are trained not just to abide ambiguity, but to glory in it. Generally speaking, Islam is less open to these difficult questions because the authority of the Quran is thought to be near absolute. But again, much depends on the flavor of the faith that we are considering. Those extreme fundamentalist groups like the Wahhabis and the Salafists, these are the most doctrinally rigid, and they have been very influential in the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But then at the other end of the spectrum, we have the Sufis. And the writings of someone like Jalaluddin Rumi reveal a refreshing openness and creative license that you don't find elsewhere in Islam. And so Rumi and others like him provide this welcome antidote to the extremists' dogmatism. So what to make of all of this? Well, for my part, I have always been intrigued throughout my 40-plus years in the ministry, intrigued by what the great monotheistic religions have had to say about God. But in all those 40 years, I have never found much of it to be personally meaningful. Yes, you study this stuff. It is good to learn about this because it helps you to understand why these religious divisions exist and why there is so much conflict within the monotheistic world. But then at the end of the day, it seems like we're just kind of tying ourselves in all kinds of unbreakable knots. And I suspect that Thomas Aquinas, perhaps the most discerning theologian in all the history of Christianity, that Thomas Aquinas felt much the same way as me during his final years. Because the story goes that one day Aquinas simply laid down his pen and he refused to write anything further about God or salvation or theology. And he was asked why. Why'd you do that? I cannot write anymore, he replied. Things have been revealed to me so that what I have written seems like nothing but straw. And perhaps Aquinas did now know what his rough contemporary, Jalaluddin Rumi and Hildegard of Bingen, already knew, that if there is an ultimate reality, it does lie beyond conceptual thought, that it is only accessible through some other perceptual faculty. Henry David Thoreau once said, "It is not when I am going to meet him, but when I turn away from him and leave him alone that I discover who God is." Or as Rumi himself put it 1,000 years ago. I am all orders of being, the circling galaxy, the evolutionary intelligence, the lift and the falling away, what is and what isn't. You who know Jalaluddin, you, the one in all, say who I am. Say, I am you. Blessed be, and amen. It is now time for the giving and receiving of our offering. And your offering today, your gifts will be shared with Dane County NAMI. You can read about their work in your program. Is it Hawaii? I haven't been a flower child since I was 21. As part of our services this weekend, we recognize and officially welcome those individuals who have joined our congregation since last June. Overall, 32 individuals have taken that step, and there are several in attendance at this hour. Becoming a member of the congregation is a pretty straightforward proposition. One generally attends a series of orientation classes, signifies their intention, professes general agreement with our Unitarian Universalist principles and our FUS bond of union, and then they enter their name into our membership registry. In terms of preliminaries and mechanics, the process isn't terribly difficult. But then we would want to ask, why join a community like this in the first place? Well, the short answer is this: we opt for membership because we believe that the promotion of liberal religious values will make a difference in the world, that a strong Unitarian Universalist movement will help to make this community and this planet a more peaceful and enlightened place. We make this commitment because we do believe in the transformative power of our tradition. And we join because we want to be part of an enterprise that can elevate humankind ethically and at a personal level fulfill us more deeply spiritually. We join also because we hunger to be in relationship with people who, like us, regard religion as an open-ended, ongoing quest for deeper meaning and for more honest and authentic religious connections. But then in joining, we also assume certain responsibilities. We agree that religion is more than just a private affair. It is intensely communal as well as an individual commitment, and so we must do our part to help strengthen the institution we belong to, and we do this in three specific ways. First, by making an effort to learn about our tradition, its history, its theology. We've done a little bit of that this morning in order to forge a stronger sense of identity with and commitment to Unitarian Universalism. We also make generous, ungrudging contributions of time, talent, and treasure, trusting that when we give from the heart, we will grow in spirit. And finally, we try to make a good faith effort to participate in the open democratic process by which our community orders its affairs. We should be prepared to become active citizens and not just passive consumers of this community's services, in keeping with the fifth principle of our faith. So this is not a casual commitment that we ask people to make, which is why we take the time today to lift up those who have taken this serious step. Dorit.
When I call your name, would you please stand?
Come forward.
And come forward. Dolores Jennison, Rick Jennison, Brian Miles, Lindsay Miles, Michael Hiley, Creel Ziering, Monica Steigerwald, Joe Steigerwald, Tom Howe, Mary Jane Getlinger, Vernon Getlinger, Megan Sipes, Brian Henniger, Julie Henniger, Barb Zahn, Michelle Green, Steve King. Are there any other new members attending that wish to be recognized? New members, after I finish asking 3 questions, please reply. Do you accept the responsibilities and freedoms associated with membership in a Unitarian Universalist congregation? Do you pledge to support this religious community with your words, your time, and your substance? Are you willing to join the members of First Unitarian Society in a common quest for religious and spiritual understanding and for the common purpose of living reverent and compassionate lives? Please respond, we do. Congregation, I have 2 questions for you. Please reply after I finish asking both of them. Do you accept these people into this community as companions in the spiritual journey? Do you pledge to rejoice with them in times of happiness, to grieve with them in times of sorrow, and to share with them all the blessings of our free faith? Please reply, we do. We do. And now if we could all join in reading our continuing bond of union. We, the members of the First Unitarian Society of Madison, desiring a religious organization in the Spirit, Jesus of Nazareth, which shall make the integrity of life its first aim, and leave thought free, associate ourselves together, and accept to our membership those of whatever theological opinion who wish to unite with us in the promotion of truth, righteousness, reverence, and charity among all.
We would offer to each one of our new members the right hand of fellowship, which is an ancient symbol of full communion with this gathered community. And let's now give our new members a warm welcome. And as they retire to their seats, let us join our voices in our closing hymn. Please be seated. And before the closing words, I would like to acknowledge that the idea for today's service comes compliments of Michael May, who purchased the topic at last spring's cabaret service auction. And Michael is lurking over there on the side, so you can either praise him or blame him for the choice. And then also, I would like to note that at the bottom of your order of service this morning, there is this little visual treat that we have in store. Some of you are aware of the fact that in recent weeks we've had some young folks here doing a lot of filming in our midst. This is the result of some of that. It's just a 3-minute little video that I think that you will find to be very inspiring. So stick around after the postlude to watch the big screen. Mary Oliver writes, "The God of the dirt came up to me many times and said so many wise and delectable things. I lay on the grass listening to his dog voice, his crow voice, his frog voice. Now, he said, and now. Never once did he mention forever. Blessed be, and amen."
For me, in my relationship with First Unitarian Society, there is really a little difference between giving and receiving. I give and I receive.
I feel as if they'll make more space for me on the inside and make stronger connections to the world on the outside.
My very first experience with the U.S. was when I was approximately 12 years old. We had driven up as a family to Madison, and my father had heard about Frank Lloyd Wright's foray, and so we drove by.
Well, my first experience was when I came to do my interview. Michael had picked me up from the airport, and he drove along the Secretary Drive to make sure that when we approached, we saw it from this best angle.
We have a strong relationship with this space. We feel really called to be a steward of the physical space that we fill.
I knew I belonged here on the first day I walked through the door.
It's more like a home than it is a commercial complex.
Virtually all of my relationships are here, 98% of them.
That cycle of giving and receiving is one